All right, well, if you're ready, Anna Rose, we'll get started. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for logging on and attending this morning's program. My name is Matt Schumann. I am on the programming team here at Cary Library. Before we begin, just a few things to note. Please let me know in the chat if there are any technical issues that I can try to resolve.
Yep.
And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to unmute yourself or just use the chat. This program is made possible by the generous donors to the Cary Library Foundation. I'd like to now introduce Anna Rose Keefe. Anna Rose has over a decade of teaching experience and has a BA in material culture from Mount Holyoke College and an MS in textiles from the University of Rhode Island. She currently works in the Costume and Textile Department at the Rhode Island School of Design Museum. We are grateful for her to take time to show us monthly various mending and sewing techniques. So now please welcome Anna Rose.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Matt. And it's nice to see some familiar names in the list of people who have showed up today. Today's program is a little bit different than some of the ones we've done in the past. Quite often I will have the hand camera and I can show you a technique. But one thing I feel very passionate about is making sure that your clothes stay in good condition. We've talked a lot about sustainability and mending and how simple mending techniques can, extend the lifespan of a garment and help you not have to throw things out. But the best, repair solution is to make sure that the hole never appears. So today's program is a little bit different. My idea was talking more about caring for your clothes, maybe doing some stain removal. It's getting warm right now, so I've put a lot of my sweaters, to the back of my closet, and maybe talking about how to put your clothes to bed if you're putting your winter stuff away now and pulling your summer stuff out. So I do have a short presentation, but I'm also hoping that this can be very conversational. If anything I say makes you think of a question, feel free to just unmute yourself, chime in. If you have an object, something that you've been thinking about how to clean it or how to care for it, feel free to just lift it up. I've got a couple little things to demo, but it's going to be more so chatting and sort of presenting today and less about hand skills. So with that, I am going to share my screen and get started with a little PowerPoint. There we go. So my imagined subtitle for this is The Care and Feeding of Your Wardrobe. Spring cleaning and stain removal, how to make your clothes last. So we're going to cover a couple simple things. We're going to talk about the basics of care. We're going to talk about brushing your clothes, stain removal, airing your clothes out, steaming them. And then we're also going to talk about safe storage. I work in a museum, so a lot of what I think about is how to store your clothes. When they're not on display in the gallery, when they're back here in storage, how do we ensure that that's a safe environment, a place that's not causing damage? If nobody's looking at it, we don't want it to fall apart. We want to make sure that things last as long as possible. And I think a lot of those rules can be really practical just in our daily lives as well. So we're going to talk about some of your options, some of my recommendations, and then tips for inside the box, how to maximize what you've got. The first question is, why do this? Absolutely, if this is not of interest, you don't have to go this deep on your own clothing storage. It probably won't be a problem if you just throw, the stuff you like in the washing machine and then put it away when you're done. But if you know that you've had pest problems, if you have, favorite garments that you want to last forever, if you're a maker and you're putting a lot of effort into the clothes you're making or the sweaters you're knitting, and you don't want to watch them fall apart, you want to get as much use out of them, I think that, some of these conservation rules should absolutely be given to makers as well, so you can get more life out of the things you make. Quite often in sustainability and slow fashion conversations, we hear people talk about buying fewer, better things. And I think that's a great idea. But frankly, even if you have a $30 coat, you want to make that coat last as long as possible. If you don't have the money to buy, one expensive item, you only have the money to buy one modestly priced item, then you want to get more life out of that. So this is just some extra attention to give the things you make and own a long life. The first thing I wanted to talk about is brushing. If you've watched Downton Abbey or any of the other sort of British period dramas, you may be familiar with the view of a butler sort of brushing off a gentleman's coat. And this is not something people do very often, but I think it's a great solution for caring for your clothes, especially outerwear, sort of wool garments, anything that you don't want to wash every time you've worn it. I mean, who throws a winter coat into the washing machine? It's not a very good solution. But brushing can be a really good way to extend the life of these. Removing food particles is important. Moths can get really attracted to crumbs. If you have, a front and you've eaten a muffin and you have a couple crumbs on it and you put it away for 6 months, a moth can get in and do a huge amount of damage in that time. So I've just got a couple brushes right here. This one is sort of a nice stiff brush. Very good for brushing off clothing. This is a very soft brush. These are sort of hacky brushes. These are great solutions for brushing off delicate things, and sort of just short strokes with a brush on any areas where you might be collecting dust or food particles can be a great solution. If you do this for your sweaters, you can see, you can align all of the fibers that may be in the yarns. You can prevent pilling. You can prevent sort of that from happening. If you have light colored materials like a white wool jacket, it's a really good idea to just brush the dust off of it. And if you have something that's felted, like a wool jacket, you want to just care for the nap of that jacket. You want it to have a really even surface. That'll keep it looking new. So if you just do this in one direction with nice repetitive motions, that'll sort of coax the nap out in a way that will make even a sort of cheaper jacket look really beautiful and really fancy. For stain removal, this is one thing I wanted to talk about. Different types of stains need different types of solutions. And definitely the best time to remove a stain is, as soon as possible. But even if you have something that's kind of old, that's kind of set in, there's a lot of ways you can remove it. So I think it's valuable to think about what the stain might be, to think about, what's there, what you're trying to pull off, because sometimes you might need to try 2 or 3 different things before you see your solution. So I've divided stains into 5 basic categories right here on the screen. Starches, oil, protein, sugars, and then pen and ink. These I think are pretty 5 common stains. For starches, I was thinking really of spray starch, what you might put on the cuffs and collar of a men's shirt that can discolor over time. I think that's a pretty common stain I see. Oil stains, this could be food. If you've ever fried bacon over the stove, that can get really messy. But it can also be things like makeup, oil-based makeup. Those can leave real stains. Or just, cooking oil, dressing, sauces, whatever you're working with or eating. For protein stains, that includes both, meat that you could be working with, but also blood. To be quite honest, baby poop. There are a lot of these sort of proteinaceous stains that can leave different weird sort of residues. Sugars, that could be candy. There's also a lot of sugar in things like ketchup and juice, some common stains there. And then pen and ink is pretty self-explanatory. Everybody's accidentally smudged a marker on themselves or lost a pen in a pocket or something. So for many of these, you're going to want hot water. That's always a good solution. And then when I say commercial detergent, what I'm really talking about is something like Tide or Woolite, the things you could get in the store. And then I would separate that out from the kind of gentle detergents, the things that you might buy in a knitting store that are specifically for treating yarn, or the things you've made. Some of those might be really good solutions for clean items, but might not be, the stain fighters that you want. So for starches, those are water soluble. I would recommend hot water and a commercial detergent. Quite often starches on men's shirts, those are things that you can also bleach. If you have a garment that is white, you could consider bleaching that as well. For oil stains, Dawn dish detergent is honestly a great surfactant. It's a really good for breaking down these things. Gentle laundry soaps might not contain both anionic and non-ionic surfactants. Those are the chemicals that break down both oil and dirt, respectively. So a lot of those knitting, friendly detergents will break down dirt, but not oil. So Dawn dish detergent, it's meant to break down the crud on your plates. It's really good for breaking down the oils in makeup. I would work it in, under hot water, maybe gently if it's a very fragile item, or with a little bit more agitation if it's something more durable. But it's a really good way to break down oil stains. And I'm sure, most of us have it in our homes already. For protein, cold water is good. Hot water can make proteins kind of sticky. If you've ever washed meat under hot water versus cold water, when chicken is raw or something, that the hot water is going to make it kind of sticky, whereas the cold water will kind of rinse away things more easily. And that goes for protein stains as well. And then hydrogen peroxide can be really good for blood or protein stains that might contain iron. If you have like an old brown blood stain, a little bit of hydrogen peroxide blotted will reduce that brown to red. And then once it's red, it's water soluble and you can just wash it away. Sugars, these are also water soluble. You can wash them in hot water with a commercial detergent. If you flip over the back of your detergent bottle, you're going to want to look for the phrase enzymes in the ingredients. Some of them have it, some of them don't. I've gone to the store before and many common detergents will say enzymes. And so those could help break it down. There are certainly things, in some detergents that are specifically made for sugar, but also rubbing alcohol can help break down sugary stains. If you've ever made candy before and sort of gotten it splattered on yourself, rubbing alcohol can be really good for breaking that down. And then I would also say for pen and ink, rubbing alcohol is great. It might impact the dyes on your garment. It's a good idea to always test rubbing alcohol in an inside seam or a cuff, somewhere that's pretty innocuous. But if not, that can lift a lot of sort of marker stains and pen and ink stains that are hard to get out otherwise. So for bleaching, I've got a little handout that I'm going to put in the chat. Going to minimize that. So this is from the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, Hawaii. It is their guide to bleach or not to bleach. And I would say if you were thinking about, how you want to clean your clothes, how you might want to bleach your clothes, what is happening when you bleach your clothes, this is a really good introduction to this. It's got some science if you've ever wondered how and why bleach works. It's got a nice little guide that will take you through, the considerations. Should I bleach this? Should I not do this? And then it's got an interesting breakdown of different bleaches. I think everybody probably knows about Clorox bleach, but there are also things like hydrogen peroxide that you might have in your medicine cabinet that are technically bleaches that can be used with clothing. So there's the peroxides on here. Sodium borohydride, many of you might be familiar with 20-mule team borax or some of those other amazing laundry sort of additives. Those also have like a limited bleaching capability. They can be really good on sort of fragile things. And then this last one in here, sulfites. If you've ever used RIT rust remover, you can buy that at Joann Fabrics or at the grocery store. That's what's in that right there. So those are mentioned as well. This also talks about light bleaching, which is a very effective way of bleaching things. So I'm just going to stop the share for a second. Drop that in the chat right there. Bishop, to bleach or not to bleach. And I would recommend that you look at that if you are thinking about bleaching anything and have some questions. I wouldn't recommend you do it on anything old. This is going to talk about it in the context of older textiles. It's not really a good idea to jump in and mess with your family treasures if this is not something you're familiar with. I would say probably take it to a conservator or a professional if you're dealing with something really fragile. But if you're just dealing with a shirt and you really want to get into it and make sure you lift that stain, that can be a great handout for you. I'm gonna head back into my PowerPoint now. So this meme on the right hand side of the screen will make sense. Yoga and vodka, I apologize, that's a little too sassy for 10 a.m. on a Friday. But cleaning with vodka is actually a really effective way of, freshening up things that are dry clean only. I think I see something in the chat. V says, with protein stains that are older, would it be a good idea to spray with hydrogen peroxide and soak in cold water, or just soak in cold water first? So what I would do is I would take the garment, I wouldn't start by soaking in cold water unless it's fresh. If it's fresh, then I would totally soak in cold water. With an older one though, I would take like a towel or a paper towel, wad that up behind, take hydrogen peroxide and just pour a little bit of it over the stain and then blot it in maybe with a second paper towel. You're going to see that sort of distinctive bubbling that you see when you pour it on a cut. It will treat, you know, the blood in the stain the same way that it would treat anything else. And then I would wash it in cold water. Then I would rinse it out. For other protein stains, you know, what you might see with like meat, I would think about the oil in a meat stain. I would think about, you know, that example of bacon, and I would maybe work on that with some Dawn dish detergent in hot water and then rinse it out later. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions if that did not give you the answer you need. But I had a brief time when I worked in the theater, and when we had to work with actors, their, you know, at union equity agreements will state that any clothing that touches their body gets rinsed every day. It has to be cleaned. You know, you're not allowed to ask actors to wear dirty things on set. And one thing we would do if we had a suit that we couldn't dry clean every day is we would spray the inside of it with vodka, just vodka in a spray bottle. We would air it out, and the next day it would not smell like alcohol. It would smell fresh, it would smell clean. We never had any buildup of bacteria. So just spraying things with alcohol in a spray bottle can be a really good way of cleaning like a suit or a jacket or something that you're not going to want to wash. Okay, Linda says, what about stains on rugs? It depends on what type of stain. Definitely, you know, I've seen red wine stains, I've seen a lot of food stains, and then there's also just like generic dirt. If it's like a carpeting, wall-to-wall carpeting, I do think that some of the commercial cleaning, you know, tools, those big vacuums, can be good solutions. But if something that you can lift up, if you can get it off the floor and get it to a place where it can be rinsed, that can be really a good idea as well. I don't mess with a lot of the rug cleaners. I would prefer to make like a poultice out of the detergent, to work it in, and then to take towels and blot on top of that stain to try and lift things out. Once you've treated a stain, one thing that can be important with rugs and bed things, other large textiles, is to put a paper towel or a towel down on top of it while it's wet, press it in there, and then leave it there as it dries. Water will sort of rise as it wicks up, as it evaporates out of the rug. And if there is any soil left behind, it's going to wind up on the top of the rug pile. If you think of rug pile as kind of being little yarns that are standing straight up, as the water evaporates, it's going to rise. And so any dirt that might be contained in that water is going to wind up on the top of the pile where you're going to be looking at it. So if you have a textile on top of that, if you have a paper towel or a towel, it will wick out of the rug into the textile on top of it, and you can lift that away. And so that'll pull any dirty liquid out of the rug when you're done sort of just scrubbing it. That would definitely save you some time. V says, what about removing mold from shoes? I have some Birkenstock sandals and tennis shoes that were packed away in baskets that I took out recently, and they have mold on them. So if you're working with something that is leather, it might not be mold. If it smells like mold, then it probably is. But if it's just like a white fuzzy deposit on there, it might be salts in the leather kind of leaching out. That is a very common thing you see on older leather shoes. I am gonna, because I'm still sharing, I'm going to escape out of this, and we are going to go to another museum website. The Alaska State Museum has a great website called What's That White Stuff? And this is for identifying mold-like deposits on leather and other organic materials. So you can see they've got this section, Caring for Alaskan Objects. What's that white stuff? If you see a growth on something that you think might be mold, quite often it is something else. So for textile and fibers, you might see little white deposits. But if they are not, if they don't smell like mold, if they look more like salt crystals, You can clean that off with mineral spirits. You can clean that off with some type of alcohols, just with like a Q-tip, and you kind of clean it off, rub it off, and that can lift them. Let's see. Oh, I think you were right. Oh, good. So I would definitely go to, it's Alaska White Stuff ID is the name of the website, and that'll help you look at efflorescence. And other salts that may leach out of leather. That happens really commonly if you put shoes away for half a year. You see those white deposits on them when you pull them out. That's pretty common and quite often. Oh, I will add that to the chat. Thank you for that reminder.
I was just going to say, I can send all these links out in the recap as well.
Yeah, because we're talking about this, it's definitely a more like link heavy conversation than normal. Loretta raised her hand. Please ask your question.
You can just unmute, Loretta.
We might even be able to unmute you if you are having trouble with that.
That's what I was trying to do, but it's only giving me the option to ask to unmute. Loretta?
Well, feel free to drop it in the chat or unmute yourself and chime in at any time. Here, I think the taxidermy and fur page of this, well, I'm not sure where the leather page is, but either way, I would definitely check out this website if you think you have mold and you don't get that distinctive moldy smell. So let's go back to airing out and spraying things. So just even, I have one pair of running shoes that I love, and just buying a second one so that you never have to wear the same pair of shoes 2 days in a row can really extend the life of a single object. You never want to wear something 2 days in a row without airing it out in between. The heat from your body and just the sweat you might produces a really hospitable environment for bacteria. And you just want to avoid that if you're looking to make your clothes last. V, yes, I said mineral spirits for removing the salts. That might be a little, I'm not sure if those are widely available or if they are sort of more of a conservation thing. I can follow up afterwards with a solution that might be easier to find at a local store. But yeah, you're going to want to look for something that's going to break down that salt. Great, thank you for Corinne. So, next slide. Steam. Steam cleaning can be a really good alternative to dry cleaning. I definitely have a lot of, nice silk things that I've found, vintage garments that I would never throw in the washing machine, some of which might even be too fragile to be dry cleaned. If you've ever gone to a dry cleaners, looked at what they're doing back there, the clothes still get thrown around in these big machines. So if you have something really fragile, just freshening it up with steam can be a good way to just kind of lift off some of those wrinkles, release some of the, things that might have landed on it. However, if you look at, tips and tricks for caring for your wardrobe, you're going to see people talk about hanging garments up sort of in the bathroom while you take a shower. It's a good way to produce steam if you don't have a steamer, but there are some downsides to that, particularly if you're working with vintage clothing. If you have something older, when you steam it, it can release a lot of smells. It can release, smoking, cigarette smells are really classic examples. And then mothball smell is another, thing you sort of smell a lot if you're steaming garments. And some of these are really hazardous to your health. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend, shutting yourself up in a small bathroom with this, garment that's letting off all these crazy smells. I would definitely consider airing things out before I steamed them and making sure I had good airflow if it was something that I suspected might have been, packed away with mothballs for a long time. So how to put your winter clothes to bed. This was my other idea for this program, to talk about, what you can do at this time of year. Thank you, V. Sorry about that. So processing your clothing properly makes it a lot easier to pull it out. Even if you're just pushing winter items to the back of your closet, you want to make sure that you put it away clean. If you're not going to look at something for 6 months, moths can do a lot of damage during that time. That's kind of what we think about in the museum all the time is if we've got, 20,000 textiles, we can't look at them every single day. So we want to create an environment where if we don't see something for 4 or 5 years, we know that, no moths are going to get to it. We know that no silverfish are going to get to it. We know that it's not going to get damaged, that nothing weird is going to happen to it. Check in on the chat. Linda says, how do you keep linen from wrinkling? So linen is very wrinkly just by its very nature. If you have garments, I would definitely consider hanging them. I would make sure that there's space around them. If you tightly pack your hanging objects together, you can easily create wrinkles on linen. And then if you have larger things, tablecloths, bed linens, especially vintage things or family things that you're looking to store, I will roll them on tubes because I think that's the easiest way to prevent those from wrinkling. Instead of folding them up tightly and putting them away, I'll get like a 3-inch diameter tube and I'll roll it around there. When you are storing things, I think it is important to stay away from the sun. UV light does more damage than, almost any other sort of thing. And then I would also consider where in your house you are storing these things. Quite often, the storage rooms we have, the attic and the basement are the two most common. They're not the ones you want to live in. Basements are often a little bit clammy. Attics are often a little bit stuffy. But those are really good environments for mold. Those are really good environments for pests. So just making sure that you're taking a little bit of extra care before you put your stuff in there can be a good idea. Let's check on the chat again. Ooh, what about wedding gowns? That's totally what we're going to get to in the next slide. I have a lot of opinions about that, so feel free to ask more questions. I'm just going to move this. And so why do we do this? Airflow can be really good, even if you've Marie Kondoed your closet and you don't have too many items. Even if you can leave all of your clothing out, year round without overcrowding yourself. Pulling some things out now and again and just making sure that your clothes can air out when you're not wearing them can be really good for them. Next slide. Oh, so storage options, soft bags. These vacuum sealed bags you can get, I think they're fine for knits and denim for things that you're not going to normally iron. But if you, put all of your nice, shirts that wrinkle easily, your linen items in a vacuum sealed bag and you pull out the air, you're going to create these deep set wrinkles that are going to take so much longer to get rid of. So I wouldn't use, anything that you want to iron in a vacuum sealed bag. And then I know a lot of people will use these clear plastic PVC bags, particularly what you get bed sheets in. Those seem like great ideas for storage, but they're made from a plastic that has a lot of chlorine in it. It's PVC. You get that sort of distinctive, fresh pool float that you've just taken out of its bag smell when you smell a linen bag. And they break down in hot, humid environments. I live in an old New England house. We do not have AC, certainly not in the attic. And the plastic will break down over time. If it's hot and it's humid, if they're under pressure, if they're in sunlight, they can get really sticky. They can get really gross. I would recommend that if you want to use soft bags, get something you can wash, get something fabric, make something out of old bed sheets, clean your bed sheets, turn them into a fabric bag and store items in there instead. It's a little bit less attractive because, you can't see what's in there, but it will make your clothes last a lot longer. So for durable boxes, I didn't include a picture of a wedding dress box, but I was thinking about it. Certainly, if you go to a place like David's Bridal, you can get those classic gold boxes that have that clear plastic front. The materials in those are not good for preservation. I've definitely worked at places before where we've opened up, these properly preserved wedding dresses, only to find that what's inside the box has gotten really, really gross. Wedding dresses are, they're worn for, that nice big meal. They're worn for dancing. You're probably wearing more makeup than normal on your wedding day. Certainly, I know a lot of people are. They get weird stains. And if you get your wedding dress, preserved by some of the bridal shops, they're not going to lift those stains before they put it in the box. So even if you just have like a sponge, blotting the front of the dress if you suspect that there are any food stains on it, letting it dry really thoroughly before you pack it away. All of these are better options than getting a commercial box. Let's see. Yeah, and so definitely if you can store it flat, underneath a bed is a good idea. Some of those boxes you can buy are practical sizes, but the longer you can go with a wedding dress, the fewer wrinkles you can have, the better. And then in the next slide, I've got an image of an old quilt that will also double for some more chat about wedding dresses. I've got these two images of clear plastic tubs here. I think they're great for storage. They're so practical. But if you look at them, they're also kind of like little terrariums. If you're putting them in a hot environment, if you're in a really humid space, if you've got sunlight on them, it can get kind of weird inside a clear plastic tub. So, you know, if you want to store these out in the open, I would definitely consider just drilling holes in them. If you have a large enough hole puncher, just create some airflow in there. I don't think that, you know, airflow is a bad thing. I think it's a very good thing for helping your clothing last. And then the last sort of point on this slide is about blue cardboard. Everyone is familiar, I'm sure, with, you know, the brown colored cardboard. I'm looking around me to see if I've got any example, just, you know, what an Amazon box is. Cardboard is also sold in archival sort of formats, and that's often colored blue. You can buy some of these things at a University Products, that's a local store out in Western Mass, or at the Container Store, they have options there. And these are acid-free. These are archival things that will just last a little bit better. So in our next slide, there, we've got an image of an old family quilt right there. Would cardboard boxes be better than plastic for storage? Regular cardboard includes a lot of acid in it. If you've seen like an old cardboard box where it starts to just get brittle, where it starts to get really, really brown, I don't think those are great. Certainly, if you wanted to use that, taking like an old bed sheet and making sure that your object is separated from the cardboard with a bed sheet can be really good. I've also seen people lining a cardboard box with aluminum foil, just like on a roll, get it at the dollar store, line a box with that. And that's a better solution than letting your clothes touch that, I would say. Oop, the screen has gone black. Okay, so what's happening inside the box? Most things are happier flat than hanging. If you have like a fragile dress, you know, something that's got like a really lightweight material in the shoulders, and if you hang that for 20 or 30 years, say a wedding dress, it's going to do a lot of damage to the shoulders. So a lot of these objects will be happier flat, where the weight is sort of spread out all over the garment, than hanging where the weight is really just borne by the shoulders. A lot of places that talk about, you know, proper storage, making sure your space is decluttered, will tell you to roll your clothes or fold them very tightly so that you can see everything. But these tight folds and creases create stress points. Every time you fold something, it kind of stretches out the top and compresses the bottom of that fold. So if you have fragile items like old quilts, I would say, you know, try and get it as flat as possible. If you have to fold it in half, if you have to fold it in quarters, you do what you got to do. But just try to create a solution that involves as few folds as possible. And then if you do have to fold it, consider padding out those folds. What I do here is I will roll up a piece of tissue paper and slide it into the fold. We call it a tissue sausage. And so that just creates, you know, instead of a tight fold, it creates more of a gentle curve. And so if I have an older material, if I have a quilt that's kind of thick, that's just a little bit more friendly than a tight fold, especially if I have to pack it away in a box and maybe put something on top of it. And then it would also separate fragile things with layers of maybe cotton muslin, bed sheets, or tissue paper. If you do have an old quilt, especially something like a crazy quilt where there's a lot of different materials, there's some embellishment, it's a good idea just to protect one object from the next. If you ever have a water leak, if you ever have a pipe leak, you want to make sure that dyes can't transfer in between things, and just create a slightly more hospitable environment. B says, would it be better to hang quilts on the wall like a picture, but wouldn't you have stress in the corners too? Definitely, you probably would. I think there are a lot of great solutions for hanging quilts, but if you go to, say, the MFA in Boston, you'll see that some of their fanciest quilts are going to be on slant boards. These are displays where the bottom is a little bit kicked out further than the top. And so that just spreads out some of the stress throughout the quilt. So it's not just that top edge bearing the weight. But certainly there are a lot of people who work, in making sure quilts are ready for display. You can stitch a tube to the back, you can stitch Velcro to the back, you can even line the whole quilt, stitch a new backing to it and kind of have that backing bear some of the weight, stitch it to the bottom, give it a little bit of lift. I think there are a lot of great solutions for hanging quilts on the wall, even long term. But I would recommend that you keep them out of direct sunlight. If you're picking a spot to display a quilt, like an interior hallway might be better than a room where it's going to get light, and that'll definitely help it last longer. Honestly, one of the best solutions for quilts is if you have a spare bed, just put it flat on the bed. You can certainly remove it when people come to town if you need your guest bedroom, but there's really no better place to store a quilt than on a bed. It's big, it's flat, all of the stress is spread out. It's pretty gentle. So, wow, this storage stuff is so much more involved than I thought. Definitely, today is the day to get in weird and ask questions about storage that you didn't even know you had. So I am gonna stop sharing on that note, and I'm hoping that we can just talk about some sort of methods for storage. Feel free to unmute yourself. Feel free to sort of ask questions in the chat. I'm here to just talk about storage and stain removal and spring cleaning with all of you. I know Loretta had a question earlier, and I'm hoping maybe if you still do, now would be a good time.
I asked to unmute, but not sure. I know that I have to now redo all of my clothing and bedding storage because I have done it all wrong.
Yeah,
Oh, there's
you
another
don't have
question.
to. This is only if you've got things that are like family treasures, things that you want to make last forever. I don't want to tell you that you're storing your jeans the wrong way. If it works for you, then it works for you. But if you've got things that you've made that you want to make sure they last for a long time, sometimes the easiest solution isn't always the best for them. V says, what's the best way to store accessories like shoes, purses, hats, etc.? When you're working with small accessories, I think it can be a really good idea to make sure you've put something inside of them. Particularly over time, shoes will kind of constrict a little bit, will contract, the leather will kind of get a little bit dry. Hats are hard to reblock. If you've ever, had a hat that you've tried to make blocking a hat, it takes a long time. So getting something like quilt batting or polyester fiber fill, putting it in maybe a nylon stocking or a little bag, creating an insert to go inside of anything that you want to save can be a great way to get it to hold its shape. And then if you have to pack a lot of shoes in a small place, you can be sure that you're not bending them out of shape by cramming them together if they all have something inside of them that's going to help them hold their shape. Winifred says, does tissue paper have acids that are problematic for storage? Some of it does, not all of it does. You can get acid-free tissue. You can get just sort of regular tissue that's meant for packing gifts and presents. And then you can also get something called buffered tissue that is not acidic, but is very slightly basic. If you think of acids and bleaches as existing on a scale, there's tissue that's a little bit acidic, and then there's also tissue that's a little bit basic. So that's more something that you're going to find in like a museum supply store. I think they also sell it at the Container Store, certain Container stores. If you've got something like a wedding dress that you really want to make last, I would Google acid-free tissue paper or look for it at an archival store at a place that maybe does scrapbooking or other sort of crafts that are meant to last a long time. And I would look for that specifically. Linda says, is dust corrosive? If you look at dust under the microscope, it's got really, really sharp edges. It's going to break down fibers because it's going to land on there. It's going to get in between the fibers and your yarns. It's going to get in between the threads with those little sharp edges. And then the more you manipulate something, the more it's just going to start snapping fibers apart. I run into this most when I'm storing my sewing thread. For years I had one of those beautiful little peg sort of thread holders where I could look at all the colors. I could arrange all my sewing thread in rainbow format, and I would just have it right at hand next to my machine. But as dust lands on, sewing thread, it's going to break it. And so after, a decade of sitting out there, I could just pull my thread apart and it wasn't durable enough to sew with. So I would say dust, can definitely break down thread and garments because of those sharp little edges. In many indoor environments, also, the sort of thing that makes up most dust is human skin cells. That's kind of gross, but it's true. And human skin cells will absorb water. We've all gotten in the bath and wound up with pruny fingers before. So if you have a dust that's kind of like an indoor dust, it's going to be, something that absorbs water, and that's going to be a really good environment for mold. So indoor dust can also be kind of a good place for mold to grow. So that's another reason to, pull it off, brush it off, sort of save your things from getting kind of gross. V says, what about removing stains from accessories that you can't put in the washing machine? Definitely blotting is always a good solution. Sometimes we'll describe something as a poultice. You can make kind of a paste almost out of a detergent or a stain remover. You can put that onto, say, a hat or a purse or something that you don't really want to rinse off. You can work it in. I've got some sponges right here that I like. This is a natural rubber sponge. Ignore how chipped my fingernails are. But these are really good for removing soot. If you've ever, had a puffback happen out of a pipe or something, these you kind of just tamp down and you can lift off things. This is just a basic sponge from Trader Joe's. They come in that giant pack. You soak them in water and they puff up. And these can be good for working on like a purse or something. I might take either a detergent, a stain remover, or, just Dawn dish detergent, kind of work it into the stain, work it over with a sponge, make sure that I can see it kind of going in and out of the stain. Can you put a list of cleaning supplies in the chat, or will the library email it out? I think an email out would probably be good, maybe with links, but I'm just going to list a couple of my favorite in the chat below. So for commercial detergents, I always look for something that's free and clear. I don't think that free and clear detergents are weaker than, the detergents that might be scented or something. I avoid detergents that have fabric softeners in them. The surfactants, that's the surface acting agent. That's kind of the active ingredient in soap. And the surfactants in detergents are negatively charged, and fabric softener is positively charged. So you've got an anionic surfactant and a cationic surfactant. And I think when you put them together in a wash bath, they cancel each other out. You have a negatively charged thing and a positively charged thing. And so instead, they're going to just get together and party in your wash bath, and they're not going to do anything to your clothing, or they're going to do less to your clothing than you would like them to. So I would avoid a fabric softener detergent. V says, list the brushes and sponges. We should look for that too. Okay, so I'm going to say pick a natural rubber sponge. I think sometimes these are sold as wonder sponges if you go on, Amazon. I know we're all trying to avoid that, but you can find it online as a wonder sponge for soot and oil right there. And then sometimes for oily sponges, one of my favorite things is just cosmetic wedges. These are meant to pick up oil. Makeup is an oil. They're meant to pick the makeup up and put it on your face. These can be really good for just working on a stain, in your kitchen sink. Particularly if it is an oil stain, I will use Dawn dish detergent and a makeup wedge, and I'll just press it in there. I'll kind of push. I'll try not to, abrade it. I don't want to stir up pills on a sweater or something. I don't want to create a new problem. But I'll just really squish down with a makeup sponge when I have an oil stain, and I've seen great results. So these are Target brand, but you can buy literally any brand. So these are makeup wedges, white rubber, and dish detergent for oily stains. There. Let's see, for brushes, I would say both soft bristle brushes, and sometimes these are sold as hake brushes. I'll put that in the chat so you all know how to spell it. For gentle objects, that would be like a nice soft sweater or something, you know, that might get pilly. Just brushing that off with a very soft brush can be a good solution. And then for heavier jackets, or, you know, if you do run into this often, military uniforms, those are a classic example of something that you're going to want to brush in order to keep it looking clean, and that you certainly don't want to just throw in your washing machine. We're looking for they're sold as just clothes brushes, but you want to make sure that it's a medium bristle brush. I also have, I don't recommend this, but I have it here as an example. So this is a wire brush. It's not for cleaning a grill, even though certainly you can find wire brushes for that. This is for cleaning a sewing space. If you're somebody who often has little bits of, you know, thread floating all over your sewing space, getting a wire brush just catches all the fuzz and sewing thread, but I think it's a little bit too aggressive for clothing. Some places might tell you to use it. I think it's just going to damage your clothes in the long run, but I do use this to clean up my sewing space. V says, what kind of brush could you use on suede shoes? I have just a soft bristle brush that is sold as a suede brush. I would go to a shoe store repair looking for one of those. Mine's almost more like a sponge, and then you just brush in one direction. That is another good idea. This chat is going to read a lot like a stream of consciousness, but it means I can download it and then create something that makes a little bit more sense and send this out to you at the end. So particularly in order to make something look, you know, neat and clean, you're going to want to line up the fuzz essentially on the surface of the fabric all in one direction. If you think of suede, you know, you can draw patterns of it, you know, in it with your finger. And it's going to look better when it's all in one direction. And that goes for just, you know, wool as well. That goes for many other materials. And so I would just make sure that when you are brushing, what you're doing is you're going in one direction, picking up and going back. You're not going back and forth. This is kind of going to cause more long-term damage, whereas that one direction brushing is going to be better. Linda said, if you have a wedding dress preserved by a cleaner, should you just leave it in the box? I would maybe consider peeking at it now and again. I think if, you know, you do have it in a space where it's not getting like super, super hot or exposed to a lot of moisture, you could probably be fine. Maybe if you remember like spilling something down the front of you, I would just like open it up and see if they, you know, maybe cleaned that off ahead of time. It also really depends on what it's made out of. You know, if you know that it is like a polyester lace, something that you really could clean, that's, you know, something you could leave till the future and not, you know, worry about it. But if you know that it's silk, if you know that it's a more delicate fiber, if you know that it's like an antique lace, I think it's a good idea to check on it now and again. And I would be happy to talk more with you about that. You know, I've certainly got a lot of opinions that are more case by case basis. I know that everybody's wedding dress is always different. So yeah, but I would say that those clear plastic, you know, tops that you get at a lot of places, those can let in UV light. So I would consider, you know, just covering that with like a piece of fabric or something, just to control the amount of UV exposure, because you don't want the bodice to age in a way that's totally different from the skirt. I've seen that a lot often is, you know, where the bodice sort of starts to yellow and the part that's out of sight is what stays bright and white and nice and clean. So depends on your box. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to say 4 wedding dresses in the chat. As flat as possible. Consider padding out creases. Remove any food stains. And then keep away from light. Those might be my guiding things. V says, how do you get rid of yellowing on older fabrics? So I just answered a survey that's happening at the Rijksmuseum in Iceland on Monday. They are launching a new project on yellowing in old linens. I think there are a lot of different solutions. That handout I showed you with the bleaches, that mentions a couple different types of bleaches that can work for yellowing. When you're talking about bleaching old fabrics, what I always worry about is over whitening. You don't want to take it too far. You don't want to dunk it in there with like hot water and Clorox bleach and take it to an ultraviolet level that's just going to damage the textile and look, kind of unnatural. But something like borax, something like hydrogen peroxide, some of these gentler bleaches at a very low concentration can remove the discoloration without artificially brightening the original color of the linen. So I would definitely think about either borax or a hydrogen peroxide bleach. And I will send you that link to that handout so that you can deal with that. If it is something older and fragile, I wouldn't try it at home. If it's something you really care about, say like a family sampler that might be yellowed, something that's got, more than just white, I would really take it to someone who knows what they're doing, who can do some tests on it, who can make sure that there's nothing weird happening, that you're not going to inadvertently damage it. But if it is, like an older tablecloth, I would consider maybe one of the gentler bleaches. Linda says, what about clothes that tell you to wash before wearing? Sometimes that's related to dyes. Sometimes that's related to finishes. I would do it, I think I don't always know why they're going to tell you that, but I certainly don't want to know what lawsuit led them down that path. So I would listen to them. When you test washing in a laboratory, I haven't done a lot of it, but the testing that I have done uses a machine called a laundrometer that simulates 5 commercial washes. So sometimes, particularly if I'm buying loom state fabric that just came off a loom, hasn't been scoured, and it says like, wash this before you use it, I will just wash it 5 times. I will just throw it in my laundry for a couple of weeks in a row before I do anything with it. I'll, not just wash it once, but I'll do it a couple times because I know that the laboratory testing simulates 5 washes and not 1. V says, I've got some underwear where the fabric around the elastic is coming apart at the edges. How can I prevent this? Does soaking clothes in detergent increase the fabric of falling apart on the elastic? So if you've got elastic, that's really sensitive to hot temperatures. Those plastics will break down. You can think of it like a rubber. So it's a good idea to wash your underwear in warm temperatures. That's something that you want to get really clean, but at the same time, that hot water is going to break down your elastic. So that might be something where I would consider washing it at a medium temperature or a cold temperature, or not putting it in the dryer, but hanging it to dry, drying it at a cooler temperature to kind of make that last a little bit longer. Does soaking clothes in detergent? I want to also answer that. In order to have cleaning action, you need water, you need heat, and you need agitation. You can skip the heat if you're using a cold water detergent, if you're using something that's built to survive in cold water. But in general, unless you've got something that specifically describes itself as a pre-soak, you're not going to get a lot of action out of soaking. You can certainly break down a lot of stains if it's water soluble, but you run the risk of the stain lifting off your garment, entering the water solution, and then depositing right back in your garment. That's one of the major things detergent does, is it ties up dirt so it can be washed away. So if you're pre-soaking, it's a better idea to have agitation and heat and to have more activity than it is to just leave it. If you want to put something in a bucket and kind of move it around, I think that can be a really good way to do a quicker thing. Soaking can be good. If you have a pre-soak, it can be good. But it's not always great. Like if you have really dirty work clothes when you come inside from gardening, I've seen people soak their clothes before they throw them in the washing machine. And it's honestly better to just throw them straight in the washing machine if you've got a lot of soil on there. You need that agitation to keep things going. You need that agitation to make the soap really live its best life and work. So, but in some cases it can be good, particularly if you have something that's sold as a pre-soak. That knows what it's doing. It's great. So, Yeah. What? So I'm also happy to answer any questions. This was kind of a funny session. Feel free to email me if anything comes up. If you have weird specific stains, I love a challenge and I'd be happy to point you to some resources. But otherwise, I hope that this has given you some thoughts about, what to do with your own wardrobe. And if spring cleaning is on the brain, hopefully, ooh, Linda says, what about urine? Okay. I'm going to get back to you on that one. Pet urine and human urine are sometimes a little bit different. I would say the sooner you can get to it, the better. But I know that there are some good enzymes that will break down urine, and I'm going to get back to you on a product that will contain them. That can be in our follow-up. So thank you, Tavi. Thank you for your questions. I hope that, this gives you some ideas. So
thank you, Anna Rose.
Engagement. So, and thank you, Matt. Yeah.
That was a tremendous encyclopedic presentation, and we will send out all the information.
It's a lot of info. Next month, we're going to be back to crafting. We're going to finally talk about pockets. Winifred says old food stains on wool. I'm just going to answer this before we go too far. I can't leave it be. So wool is going to not want to be washed at hot temperatures. Wool is also something you don't want to bleach. You can bleach the daylights out of cotton and linen and sort of wind up with something that is beautiful. Wool will really fall apart if you bleach it. So I would say definitely focus maybe on a gentler detergent, maybe even Dawn dish detergent if it's like an oily food or a meat. And then I would do cold temperatures, not too much moving around. I might even consider putting it in a sink and then kind of doing patty paws, I call this, when you put pressure on it with very flat hands, kind of agitate it, move it around, and then let it dry flat. I think that's better for wool. V says, can't wait for pockets. Yeah, next month, we're going to be back to hand camera. We're going to be back to crafting. We're going to be back to pockets. So bring something that you think deserves pockets. And we'll talk about how to do exterior patch pockets, as well as how to open up a side seam so that you can sneak a little pocket in there.
Well, the recording of this program will be on our YouTube page. You can search Cary Library on YouTube or just go to our website, carylibrary.org, and click the YouTube button. Again, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Anna Rose, for being our expert every month on all things clothing.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And V, I'll see if we get to hidden pockets. It might be a secret. I'll keep that as my hidden secret. Perfect. See you all next month, and thank you for having me, Cary Library.
Thank you.